faces mounting legal challenge, protests across the country. Good morning, everybody. It's President's Day. Hope you had an awesome weekend. Heather, welcome to you. I'm Bill Hemmer, live here in New York. Nice to see you, Heather.
I am Heather Childers. Great to be here with you and for Sandra Smith. You know, challenges on multiple fronts we're talking about for the White House. House Democrats gearing up for resolution opposing the declaration, and border states gearing up for lawsuits as well. Here's California Attorney General Xavier Becerra.
We're confident there are at least 8 billion ways that we can prove harm, and whether it's emergency response services for whether it's fires or mudslides in California, maybe tornadoes and floods in other parts of the country, or whether it's our military men and women and their families who live on military installations that might have money taken away from them, or whether it's money taken away from drug interdiction efforts in places like California. A number of states, and certainly Americans, will be harmed.
All right, Chief White House Correspondent John Roberts with the view from the North Lawn today. Brand new week, John. Good morning.
Happy President's Day to you from the White House this morning. MoveOn.org has got a day of protest planned across the nation, including one, we believe, in Lafayette Park right across the White House. You mentioned Xavier Becerra, the Attorney General from California. He, the American Civil Liberties Union, and others are all lining up to file lawsuits against the president's emergency declaration when they return from their week off this week. It's a recess. Members of Congress on the Democratic side planning on introducing legislation to block the emergency declaration as well. Listen to what Adam Schiff, the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, said yesterday.
Is this the first time a president has tried to declare an emergency when Congress explicitly rejected funding for the particular project that the president is advocating?
Yeah, you know, the president said on Friday in announcing this that there's been dozens of emergency declarations, but this one is an appropriations declaration, which is designed to circumvent Congress. White House officials say, though, if Congress does pass legislation to block the declaration, the president may veto it. Here's the president's chief policy advisor, Steve Miller, with Chris Wallace on Fox News Sunday.
Obviously, the president is going to protect his national emergency declaration, Chris. And I know that we're out of time, but again, I want to make this point. There's no threat.
So, yes, he will veto?
He's going to protect his national emergency declaration, guaranteed. This is a threat in our country, not overseas, not in Belarus, not in Zimbabwe, not in Afghanistan or Syria or Iraq, but right here. And if the president can't defend this country, then he cannot fulfill his constitutional oath of office.
Now, keep in mind, Bill, everybody's talking about this emergency declaration. The emergency declaration only unlocks the military construction money, the so-called Section 2808 money. All of the other money, which includes the Treasury forfeiture, the Section 284 DOD, anti-drug funds, transferring some money within the DOD. He doesn't need the emergency declaration for that. So the White House believes that even with these court challenges, they still may be able to get their hands on about $4.5 billion to put toward wall construction.
Which isn't nothing, right? McCabe interview.
It's almost what the president wanted.
Exactly right about that. McCabe interview last night, 60 Minutes. What's the White House saying about that today, John?
Clearly making a lot of news. Andrew McCabe, the former deputy director of the FBI, saying while he did not participate in lengthy discussions about a 25th Amendment removal of the president, he did speak to Rod Rosenstein, the deputy attorney general, about it. Rosenstein mentioned it to McCabe, and according to McCabe, Rosenstein was serious about it. Listen to what he said on 60 Minutes.
The discussion of the 25th Amendment was simply Rod raised the issue and discussed it with me in the context of thinking about how many other cabinet officials might support such an effort.
Not surprisingly, the president going off on McCabe and Rosenstein this morning, tweeting, quote, "Wow, so many lies by now disgraced acting FBI Director Andrew McCabe. He was fired for lying, and now his story gets even more deranged. He and Rod Rosenstein, who was hired by Jeff Sessions, another beauty, looked like they were planning a very illegal act and got caught. There is a lot of explaining to do to the millions of people who had just elected a president who they really like and who has done a great job for them in the military, vets economy, and so much more. This was the illegal and treasonous insurance policy in full action." South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham, vowing that he is going to investigate what he called an administrative coup, says if necessary, he will subpoena McCabe and Rosenstein to testify before the Senate Judiciary Committee. Committee member Chris Coons has got a different take on it, though. First, listen to Graham and then Coons.
There's an allegation by the acting FBI director at the time that the Deputy Attorney General was basically trying to do an administrative coup, take the president down through the 25th Amendment process. The Deputy Attorney General denies it. So I promise your viewers the following, that we will have a hearing about who's telling the truth.
It is alarming that there were apparently folks at the highest levels of our government considering whether or not our president is unfit to serve. I don't think that this, frankly, rises to the level of some deep state conspiracy.
No word yet on when Graham may call for that hearing, but I expect it'll be sometime pretty soon. Bill?
Thank you, John. Nice to see you. John Roberts there at the White House. Heather.
And with more on this, Mark Thiessen joins us, columnist for the Washington Post, resident fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, and a Fox News contributor. So what do you make? Let's begin with declaring the national emergency over the border wall or funding for border security.
So basically, at every point along the way, President Trump has made the wrong decision when it comes to this border wall. So a year ago, he was offered $25 billion for the border wall in exchange for DACA, and he blew it. Then last June, a bipartisan vote in the Senate Appropriations Committee appropriated $1.6 billion, and he turned that down, insisted on 5.7, and shut down the government for 35 days, and he got 1.375, so he got less money. Now he's declaring a national emergency. He doesn't need to do a national emergency. He should take the 1.375. Half of the money that he's going to be using, he could get without a national emergency. It's just reprogramming authority that nobody contests. So he could have $4.5 billion for the wall right now without a national emergency.
Well, where does he get that additional money?
So half of the additional money is from reprogramming authority that the president has. So he can take it from the Drug Enforcement Agency and from DOD drug enforcement money. And so that comes to $4.5 billion if you combine it with the 1.38 that he got from Congress. It's a lot of numbers, but basically he could have $4.5 billion, which is about a billion less than he asked Congress for right now, without a national emergency, and then start building the wall. And then in September, he has leverage with Congress because there's an automatic sequester coming in December. And if he doesn't approve raising spending caps, he can take $55 billion away from the Democrats in domestic spending. They'll give him the wall in exchange for that.
So the president is not just doing this on his own willy-nilly. He has advisors.
Sure.
So why would his advisors be telling him instead to go this route?
I don't know that he's doing it on the advice of his advisors, just like he didn't do the Syria pullout on the advice of his advisors. I think he thinks it's a good idea.
Okay.
I think he's been advised by Senator Mitch McConnell. There are 14 Republican senators who've come out against this and said that they are opposed to it. I don't know how they'll vote on a resolution of disapproval, but the reason you should be worried about if you're a conservative, you should be worried about a national emergency is because if Trump can do this to build the border wall when Congress has explicitly not given him the money, then a liberal president could do the exact same thing and declare a climate emergency and fund the Green New Deal. Or there could be another school shooting and they'll say there's an epidemic of violence in our schools. We need to have more gun control. So we don't want the president of the United States as conservatives to have unfettered power like this.
Well, we know it's going to be challenged. We know that the president said that he expects it to be challenged.
Absolutely.
He expects it to make it to the Supreme Court where he believes that they will find in his favor like they did with the travel ban. I do want to ask you before we move out of time in reference to Andrew McCabe and the interview with 60 Minutes yesterday. Your take on that?
So Andrew McCabe is a proven liar. Andrew McCabe was fired from the Justice Department after the Inspector General found that he had lied to his own colleagues at the FBI. He was referred to the Office of Professional Responsibility, which recommended his dismissal and then referred criminal charges. So there's now a grand jury investigating whether to prosecute him. So I take what he says with a grain of salt. This guy has been fired from the FBI because now if he lied to his own colleagues, why should we trust he's going to tell the truth to 60 Minutes?
What part do you think was not truthful?
I just don't. He's saying that the president's cabinet was planning to invoke the 25th Amendment. I mean,
there were at
I
least
think
two
that's
people
a little
willing to do that.
I think that's a little bit fanciful. But you know, again, and why Lindsey Graham wants to have hearings into this? Why would you give him a platform to sell books with a national television audience?
Yeah.
If you want to do that, question him privately.
And so
but
you think
don't give him a hearing.
Rosenstein was kidding, as he said, when he was talking about miking himself up?
I don't know. I wasn't in the room. I don't know who's telling the truth, but I know that Andrew McCabe is a liar.
All right. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Lots to talk about. Well, with more reaction to Andrew McCabe's stunning revelations and what is next, what the president's next move should be after his Rose Garden declaration, Mercedes Schlapp, White House Director of Strategic Communications, joins us a little bit later in the hour.
We believe Smollett is lying and should be brought to justice for lying to authorities.
Well, that's the latest. Another bizarre turn in the investigation about an alleged attack on Jussie Smollett. Chicago police now releasing 2 men questioned in the case. They have not been charged, while saying they no longer consider the actor to be a victim. Mike Tobin's got more from Chicago. This is developing by the day. Mike, good morning.
It is developing by the day, and the development that came over the weekend, as you mentioned, is that police no longer consider Jussie Smollett to be a victim of a hate crime. They stopped short, though, of saying that he is a suspect of conceiving, then launching a hoax complete with racist and homophobic slurs and an attacker telling him this is MAGA country. Police did say they have developed new information. They won't say what that information is, but they want to bring in Smollett for more questioning. And this follows that long interrogation of 2 brothers from Nigeria who had been identified as persons of interest from a grainy security video. Smollett's legal team says one of them was the actor's personal trainer. One worked on the show Empire. They were both trying to make it as actors. Police said the brothers were cooperative, and they developed evidence that said the 2 brothers should go free.
Innocence prevailed, all right? My guys are walking home. They're not charged. They are not suspects in this case.
Did Jussie Smollett set this up?
You know, there's still a lot of moving parts to this.
Now, a report ran in the Chicago Sun-Times this morning saying Smollett might submit to questioning today. A representative of his legal and PR team told me this morning that report's not entirely active, no confirmation or accurate, no confirmation on what Smollett's next move will be. And when pressing police about whether this case is headed to the grand jury, police went back to what has now become a familiar refrain. They want to get Smollett in for more questioning. Then the question about the grand jury can be answered.
Thank you, Mike. Mike Tobin there in Chicago today.
You got it.
And a Fox News alert, President Trump calling on our European allies to take hundreds of ISIS prisoners as U.S.-backed forces in Syria make a final push to destroy the remnants of the caliphate.
Also, the White House gearing up for another fight over border security. We're getting a look at the dire situation in parts of the southern border. I'm going to talk with the Border Patrol agent Chris Cabrera about all that coming up shortly here.
Well, President Trump preparing for a fierce battle as lawsuits stack up against his plan to move funds toward construction of a border wall. Some border agents are supporting the plan.
Whether it's specifically MS-13 or even criminal aliens in those groups, you know, we see people like that. We also see ones that have criminal records, have been in this country before, have been removed. So we know that's a concern when we're talking with any group, but certainly when we talk about large groups, it's an added concern.
Well, another Border Patrol agent joins us now. Chris Cabrera is in San Antonio, Texas, and he is also a spokesman for the National Border Patrol Council. Thank you very much for joining us. We appreciate it.
No, thanks for having me.
So I'm not sure if you heard our last guest, Mark Thiessen. He said he is not in favor of the president declaring this national emergency. What do you think? Was this the correct thing and the appropriate thing for the president to do?
You know, I don't know too much about the politics of it all and, you know, how the money gets distributed. What I do know is we have a very real situation along the southwestern border from Brownsville all the way to San Diego, specifically in the Rio Grande Valley. We have thousands coming in daily and thousands that are coming in undetected on top of that. And anybody who thinks that there is no crisis and there is no need to do something down here has got their head in the sand.
You know, and I think that's what people need to hear. You know, take away the politics of it and talk about the very real crisis is actually happening at the border and the lives being lost.
Yeah, you know, lives are lost down there. Women and children are violated. Bad things happen down there, and people just turn a blind eye to it. I think people are so caught up in the politics and the hate of it that they turn a blind eye to what's actually going on. Mm-hmm. And I would invite anybody, any of these lawmakers that says there is no crisis down there to come down to the Rio Grande Valley. I'll show you around myself, and you can see firsthand what's going on.
Yeah, tell us about that. I mean, some of your personal experiences. I know that there are some ranchers I spoke with there in the Rio Grande area who have repeatedly invited Nancy Pelosi, amongst others, to come down there and take a look at it and see for themselves what's going on.
Yeah, you know, we see hundreds a day walking up and turning themselves in. We have people that are still trying to avoid detection. They go hand in hand with the smugglers directing those, turning themselves in to coincide with the ones that are trying to avoid detection, as well as large drug smuggling loads. At any given time along the southwestern border, you have at least 40%, if not more, that's either unmanned or undermanned out there. So there is a need to secure this border.
And in reference to what the president has agreed to in terms of this just 55 additional miles of fencing, new fencing, I know that the CBP was requesting at least 200 miles. They said that that was needed. What about this 55 miles in the area of the Rio Grande? Will that be enough?
Well, it won't be enough, but it is needed. I mean, if we can get 50, 55, 60, whatever they want to give us for now, it'll do for now. But we need to get the rest of it done. It's just amazing down there. There's not even words to describe what goes on down there on a daily basis. And for us to turn on the TV at night after we get home from work and hear that there's no problem, it's mind blowing.
In terms of the use of drones and an increased amount of money and support going to the Border Patrol agents themselves, is that enough that's being offered at this point? Do we need more funding for that as well?
Well, one of the big things we've been fighting against is retention. We have a lot of agents either going off to greener pastures, going to different agencies, or retiring, and we can't seem to hire enough people to get agents to do this job. So that's something that needs to be addressed. The catch and release system needs to be addressed. And I think what people fail to realize is the public health aspect of it all. We have a lot of people with infectious diseases that come through, and we release them into the country pending their court date. So that's another issue that needs to be looked at.
You talked about the port of entry. You'll hear these conversations that people have, and they say, well, the majority of the drugs are caught at the port of entry points, and supplying them with additional, money so that they can up what they need at the port of entry is enough.
Well, that's kind of, that statement speaks for itself. Is the amount of drugs caught at the port of entry is a lot because they're manned all the time. We have areas in the border between the ports of entry that are unmanned. So what do you think's coming through there? The drugs and the people are coming through there. That's why the cartels are fighting for that land in Mexico just south of these areas because of the lucrative smuggling routes. They know where the gaps are. The gaps aren't at the port of entries. The gaps are between the port of entries. That's why they're using them. And we'll never know how much is getting through until we secure this border.
Yeah. All right. Chris Cabrera, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Got another bizarre twist in the case involving Jussie Smollett. Investigators now saying they no longer believe that he is the victim of a hate crime. But what about the media and their initial reporting on the allegations? Howie Kurtz is looking into this. We'll talk to Howie coming up shortly.
Welcome back. Some Florida inmates now being hailed as heroes for breaking into an SUV. Watch.
Yes, thank God. Woo! Honey, was that stressful? Oh my God.
So here's what happened. They used some tricks of the trade to rescue that little baby who was locked inside. The inmates were repairing some medians in Pasco County Thursday when a mom locked her car keys in the vehicle by mistake with her 1-year-old daughter inside. You can see she recorded the men wearing their prison garb, getting into the SUV and rescuing her unharmed little girl.
So the attorneys for Jussie Smollett say that he felt victimized by reports that he staged his own attack. As Chicago police have now released 2 brothers after questioning, saying they no longer are suspects in the case. These news reports suggesting the actor may have paid the brothers to stage the attack. And some media outlets that were quick to embrace the version are now backing away. Howard Kurtz, host of Media Buzz, also our Fox News media analyst. How you doing, Howie? Good morning to you. I know you're doing the story over the weekend on your show on Sunday. Where do you think we are today?
Well, there are plenty of people, Bill, who recklessly rush to judgment over this in politics, media, and entertainment. For example, Washington Post opinions editor said this heinous attack reminds us that Trump's ascendance and the resulting climate of hate has meant many people lives have been increasingly at stake since 2015. Actress Ellen Page went on television and said we should connect the dots between Mike Pence and homophobic attacks. I'm waiting for her apology to the vice president. And among the 2020 Democrats, Kamala Harris and Cory Booker both called it a modern-day lynching, in other words, accepting it all as fact. But I would argue that most news organizations actually acted with restraint, these particular examples aside.
How did you see that? How have you reported on that, Howard?
Well, first of all, you know, a guy who's a star in the Fox show Empire makes these, you know, terrible sounding accusations. You have to report that. The Chicago police were taking it seriously and investigating, and you have to report that. Now, you and I and many other people in the business knew that something about this didn't smell right from the beginning. There were things that didn't add up, but that's not enough to go on the air or write. In fact, I resisted invitations to do that because the situation was so murky. But the media also reported, various organizations, the red flags that came up. Why did he delay in reporting the attack? Why did Jussie Smollett not quickly turn over his phone? And so we began to see the shift, but until recent days, I don't think we had enough evidence to say this was some kind of hoax.
Interesting. A few things I'll throw in here. Donald Trump Jr. over the weekend tweeted this: strange that no one in Hollywood or the mainstream media seems to want justice for Jussie anymore. Wonder what changed. David Webb was on with Brian earlier today and said the following about how he sees it at the moment. David Webb.
We've got all these different instances where the reality doesn't match the narrative. There's a blowback effect, though, Brian. When it comes to the country, we as Americans are starting to see this. We're starting to see that these incidents are being used to gin up hatred.
It's still difficult to know motivation or what happened here, Howie, but what about that point about ginning up hatred?
Well, certainly any time, and we saw this with the Covington High School kids, where there's a reference to Trump, where there are MAGA hats or talk about MAGA country, many people who do not like this president seize on it and say, you see, it's his fault, it's the climate. The president's son had a point with his comments, but Donald Trump himself, when asked about this, said the attack was horrible at a time when we did not know. But I do think that if it hadn't been, I mean, look, the attack on a TV star would have been big news regardless. But when you add the extra nitroglycerin of a Trump element or a MAGA hat, it does seem a lot of people just put any skepticism aside and convict in advance. And this is another case, even though we still don't know everything, where that seems to be very
your big point here, some of the celebrities and politicians did not act with restraint in terms of reacting to the story. But
and some journalists too on Twitter.
But most, you characterize media organizations as acting with restraint.
I think that you couldn't go beyond the available facts, even though you could point out the holes. Look, the guy went on Good Morning America and told Robin Roberts in graphic detail how this happened. She asked him about the skepticism, and now that his lawyer is saying, oh, he's insulted that anyone's raising questions, well, I think it's pretty clear that the story has taken a dramatic turn.
Matt Finn reports for us in Chicago. Smolla's crisis manager telling Matt Finn that they're getting ready to release a statement today, and also confirming that not confirming that Jussie will meet with police today. So we'll see as developments go there. Nice to see you, Howie. Howie Kurtz there in Washington, D.C. Thanks.
Well, the social media giant Facebook under fire yet again. Why some of its critics are now calling them a digital gangster.
Also, the uproar over the president's plan for building the border wall amid growing legal and political pushback. What does the White House do next? Mercedes Schlapp is going to make her case. Strategic Communications Director live from the White House. We will talk to Mercedes coming up shortly right here.
Of Americans die year after year after year because of threats crossing our southern border. We have families and communities that are left unprotected and undefended. We have international narco-terrorist organizations. This is a threat in our country, not overseas. This is part of a national security mission.
But it has never done this under a national emergency where President...
We've declared national emergencies to promote democracy in Belarus, to promote democracy in Zimbabwe.
But it didn't involve taking money that Congress refused to appropriate.
They didn't refuse to appropriate it. They passed a law specifically saying the president could have this authority. It's in the plain statute. That's a decision that Congress made. And if people don't like that, they can address it.
Pretty hot interview there on Fox News Sunday. The White House not backing down on the border wall in the face of growing political and growing legal challenges. Stephen Miller insisting that the crisis is real and that President Trump will not ignore it as his predecessors did. Mercedes Schlapp, White House Director of Strategic Communications, live with us out of Miami today. Mercedes, welcome back to America's Newsroom. I know you're there for the Venezuela announcement later today. But let's talk about the border here, first of all. What's the White House's reaction to some of the pushback now on the legal sense for this, the lawsuits?
Look, we feel that we're in strong legal grounds and in pushing forward and declaring this national emergency. We know that we have the presidential authority to do so. Congress has these statutes, and it's been used before over 50 times since 1976. So we feel like we're on solid legal ground on this issue.
Based on what is that, the Mercedes?
It's been used before, and what we're seeing right now at the border is an emergency. I mean, we're seeing the fact that our Border Patrol agents are having a tough time having the operational support needed to secure the border. You're also seeing the fact that it's a humanitarian and security crisis, as the president has spoken about this issue time and time again. We've seen criminals, smugglers, coyotes, human traffickers taking advantage of our immigration laws and also putting at risk many vulnerable families who are coming from Central America. So this, again, it is the obligation of this president to provide the safety of Americans in the United States, and he's upholding his duty. And part of this is declaring this national emergency.
Okay, two specific questions. Did the statements from the Rose Garden on Friday hurt your case? The detractors would argue that the president said that he did not have to go this route. And then he also said that he'll lose a few legal cases, but ultimately win at the U.S. Supreme Court. Does that hurt your standing before a judge?
Look, we know the realities of judicial activism, as you've seen so many times with the Ninth Circuit, for instance. But at the same time, the president didn't want to have to choose this route because he wanted to see if Congress would negotiate a better deal. They, of course, fell short with pushing forward $1.375 billion towards the physical barriers. Now, that, of course, is better than the $0 or less than $1 that Speaker Pelosi was going to offer. But again, it's being able to have access these additional funds that our Border Patrol agents need, the ability that we're going to be able to immediately start building these physical barriers along the southern border in these most vulnerable areas, and the fact that we're going to be able to prioritize based on the needs and where we believe that we need to be building.
Would you argue that there is a pot of money that is outside the purview of the legal challenge? A pot of money that may total some $4 billion? Is that
well,
part of this?
we're definitely part of this is the forfeiture fund that comes from the Department of Treasury, which is about $600 million. We're also looking into the Department of Defense, the counter-drug activities, where you're able to build fences and roads in areas where there's high density of drug smuggling. So this is an opportunity to really be able to build these physical barriers in much needed areas, as we know, and even Democrats have been on the record.
I just want to be clear about the point, is that you can go ahead, you're making the case that you can do that now while the legal process plays out. Is that what the White House believes?
That is correct. That is correct. In those pots of money, we can start building immediately. We can start working with our contractors. The president met last week with a general from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to get this process going. The president wants to move fast. He recognizes that this problem has been festering for decades. The mere fact that we haven't been able to close the immigration loopholes, the mere fact that the Democrats are pushing an open borders agenda and really do not care if illegal immigration surges. So the president wants to take action. We want to push forward legal immigration into America, but we also have to gain operational control of the border.
I just want to move to two other topics in the time I have left here. Venezuela, big speech this afternoon. What's the message about kicking Maduro out? Because so far he's been pretty stingy. And to assume that he's just going to leave might be a bit short-sighted. What's the message today?
The message is the president's going to deliver a strong message to the Venezuelan people. We stand with Venezuela. That community, millions of people are going to the streets. Millions of people are speaking up against the oppressive Maduro regime that has destroyed the social and economic fabric of that country. It is time for Maduro to exit. We know that President Guaido is gaining so much support from the civil society. That includes the labor unions, the churches, the students. And we know that more and more they're coming together, even the rank and file of the military supporting President Guaido. Maduro is simply a Cuban puppet. And what we know is that Cuba has sent over 20,000 security forces to Venezuela. Their interest is not that of the Venezuelan people that Maduro is starving.
Does it appear, though, that Maduro has more support than you thought? And perhaps you underestimated his staying power?
Absolutely not. More and more countries are recognizing the legitimacy of the Guaido presidency. And we know that it's about 50 nations right now. This is not going to be easy, but we are looking for a peaceful transition in Venezuela. And we know that we stand with President Guaido. President Trump spoke with him a couple weeks ago and talked about the historic moment right now in Venezuela. It's not going to be easy, but we're going to continue this maximum pressure campaign on Venezuela.
Last topic, Andrew McCabe, what is the reaction from the White House? We've heard from the president on Twitter. What's your reaction to the claims that he made last night on 60 Minutes?
Well, I mean, McCabe has no credibility. He was obviously fired by the FBI. We know he's lied on multiple occasions, including under oath, and he's a partisan hack. So he's trying to sell a book, but the mere fact is that he's a liar.
All right. What did he say last night that was new?
You know, I don't really think there was much news to McCabe's interview. As you know, last week he had to take back certain statements that he's made. And we've had Rod Rosenstein coming out basically saying that McCabe's comments are inaccurate. So I don't understand why they keep giving this platform to McCabe when he's an absolute liar, where we know clearly.
He made the suggestion that the president was relying on Putin's advice with regard to North Korea's missile program and not the intelligence community. Is that true?
Look, we know where McCabe's political tendencies lie. He obviously doesn't like the president, and he obviously was targeting the president. And in essence, we're not going to believe anything that McCabe has to say because of the fact that not only has he lied to investigators, he's lied under oath, and there's no credibility to his statements.
Last question. How long is Rod Rosenstein in his position?
You know, that's a decision for Rod Rosenstein to make. The president has a good relationship with him.
You have no information as to when his tenure is complete.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, Mercedes Schlapp, thank you for your time. The event this afternoon on Venezuela, we'll be watching from here. Thank you out of Miami today.
Thank you so much.
Heather, what's next?
Well, President Trump with an urgent warning for our European allies, why he says that they should take hundreds of homegrown ISIS extremists now held in Syrian prisons, and how the EU is responding. Former CIA station. President Trump warning Europe to take back hundreds of ISIS fighters captured in Syria, or they could be released. In a series of tweets, he said the United States is asking Britain, France, Germany, and other European allies to take back over 800 ISIS fighters that we captured in Syria and put them on trial. The U.S. does not want to watch as these ISIS fighters permeate Europe, which is where they are expected to go. We do so much and spend so much. Time for others to step up and do the job that they are so capable of doing. We are pulling back after 100% caliphate victory. Well, let's bring in Dan Hoffman. He's a former CIA station chief and Fox News contributor. He's also about to join the President's Intelligence Advisory Board. Thank you for joining us, Dan, and great to see you again. Saw you at 4 a.m. this morning.
Yeah, you too. Happy President's Day.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit more about this. We're talking about ISIS members coming from over 40 different countries. Do you agree with what the president is saying here?
Yeah, I do. You know, our Kurdish allies who make up the bulk of the Syrian Democratic Forces have been holding reportedly roughly 3,000 prisoners. And once we withdraw our troops scheduled for this April, the Kurds are going to need to focus on defending themselves from potential attacks from Turkey and then targeting the remnants of ISIS. As the president correctly pointed out, that's going to be important going forward.
So once these ISIS fighters are taken back to these countries, if in fact that happens, how do we confirm then that the courts don't re-release them in some of these countries? Listen to what Niall Gardner had to say from the Heritage Foundation.
I think the problem, though, is that European courts tend to be so liberal that there is a fear, I think, in some European capitals that some of these fighters could actually be be freed and get away scot-free. And I think that's a real problem in Europe, actually, the failure of the court system to be able to deal with these terrorists.
Reasonable concern?
Yeah, very reasonable concern. You know, Syria really was just a petri dish, a jihadist magnet attracting radical Islamic extremists. And one of the things that we've done in the past is to share reporting we have.